It was just a normal day at Eastside High School, until one student's shame would spark a fire that could never be put out. Jenna Daniels had always been an outcast. Her clothes were worn, her hair messy. But on this day, the day that would change everything, she walked into class just like any other day, except this time, she was about to be humiliated in front of everyone. Her teacher, Mrs. Thompson, noticed her before anyone else, and in an instant, the decision was made. "You're filthy, Jenna. Do you think you can come to school looking like that?" But what Mrs. Thompson didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jenna's dirty clothes weren't a choice. And soon, Mrs. Thompson would find herself fighting a battle far bigger than any classroom rule. Jenna Daniels had always been a quiet girl, the kind of student who blended into the background, doing her work without fanfare. She wasn't popular, not by a long shot. Her clothes were hand-me-downs from thrift stores and old relatives, things that never quite fit or looked right. But it didn't matter to Jenna. She didn't care about labels or looking perfect. She just needed to survive another day at Eastside High. But that morning, something was different. Jenna had arrived late, as she often did. She had to walk the 2 miles from the bus stop because her mother couldn't afford the gas to drive her. Jenna's shoes were scuffed, her shirt wrinkled from a long night of restless sleep on the couch, sharing it with her little brother, who had spent the night coughing from a cold. When she walked into Mrs. Thompson's class, the silence that greeted her felt heavier than usual. Mrs. Thompson, a woman known for her stern demeanor and passion for rules, was standing by her desk, watching the class settle down. But when her eyes landed on Jenna, a flicker of disgust crossed her face. "Jenna," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Do you think you can come into my classroom looking like that? Are you trying to embarrass us all?" The words hit Jenna like a punch to the gut. She froze, her face burning with humiliation. The whispers of her classmates followed her to her seat. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to defend herself. But what Mrs. Thompson didn't know was that Jenna wasn't wearing dirty clothes because she didn't care. She was wearing them because she had no choice. What Mrs. Thompson didn't see was the night Jenna had just survived. She didn't know that Jenna's mother was a single parent who worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Jobs that barely covered rent and utilities. She didn't know that Jenna's little brother had been sick for weeks, their heating system broken, and the food in the fridge almost gone. Mrs. Thompson didn't know that Jenna had spent the night trying to fix the broken faucet in the kitchen, using YouTube videos to teach herself how to do something she didn't understand, just so they wouldn't have to call a plumber. And after all that, she couldn't even get a decent night's sleep. Her mom had been too tired to help. But now, as Mrs. Thompson's harsh words echoed in the classroom, the shame that had been buried deep inside Jenna began to rise. She tried to hold back the tears, but it was useless. Her emotions were running wild. She had wanted so badly to be invisible today, to just slip into her seat and escape the world around her. But now, her worst nightmare had come true. Jenna's classmates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some whispered, some giggled, but it was clear they were watching her. Mrs. Thompson, still standing at the front, didn't seem to care about the ripple of unease she was creating. She continued, her voice full of authority. "You know, you can't expect to get anywhere in life if you don't put in the effort. And this," she waved her hand dismissively at Jenna, "this is not what effort looks like." Asterisk. Jenna wanted to scream. How could she know what effort was? How could anyone? But she said nothing. She couldn't. Not when her throat was tight with emotion. Not when the weight of her life seemed to press down on her chest. The bell rang just as Mrs. Thompson finished speaking. It was a small reprieve, but it didn't change the way Jenna felt. The shame lingered in the pit of her stomach, following her all the way through the hallway, to her next class, and even out to lunch. But as Jenna sat down, pulling her lunch from her backpack, she heard a voice. It was soft at first, then louder. "You didn't deserve that." Jenna turned. It was Casey, a girl she barely knew. They had never spoken much, but Casey had a reputation. She was quiet but kind, and Jenna had seen her stand up to bullies before. Casey sat down beside her, a determined look in her eyes. "Mrs. Thompson doesn't get it. She has no idea what it's like for you. It's fine. Jenna muttered, not meeting her gaze. I'm used to it. Casey shook her head, her voice steady, almost angry. No one should be used to being treated like that. You deserve better. And you shouldn't let anyone make you feel less than you are. Jenna blinked, caught off guard. She didn't know how to respond. Was she really worth defending? After all, who was she? Just a girl in worn clothes with an empty lunchbox and a tired heart. But Casey's words began to crack something open inside her. Something that had been buried deep for so long. Jenna never expected that someone like Casey would stand up for her. The days that followed were filled with whispers and sideways glances. But in the midst of all that, something remarkable began to happen. A few others started to speak up. Other students who had been quietly watching now began to voice their support for Jenna. But it wasn't just the students. The next day, the principal, Mr. Harris, called Jenna into his office. She had been expecting a punishment, maybe even an apology from Mrs. Thompson. But what she got instead was something far more unexpected. Jenna, Mr. Harris began, looking at her with sympathy. I've received multiple complaints about Mrs. Thompson's behavior in class. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is there more going on here than we realize? Jenna stared at him, her mind racing. Could she tell him the truth? Could she trust him? For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Jenna's mind raced. The possibility of someone, anyone, standing up for her felt like a fragile thread, ready to snap at any moment. But she couldn't back down now. She wasn't just fighting for her dignity anymore. She was fighting for the truth. Her words caught in her throat as she prepared to speak. But just before she could answer, the door opened. It was Mrs. Thompson. Her face was tight, her expression unreadable. But there was something different about her now. Something that wasn't there before. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice almost too quiet. I didn't understand. I thought I was doing the right thing. Jenna looked up at her, her stomach a twisting knot. What was she supposed to say now? As Jenna sat there in silence, she realized something far bigger than just this moment was unfolding. The truth was about to be revealed. Not just about her clothes, but about the inequities that so many students like her faced every single day. But would it be enough? Would Jenna finally have the strength to fight for herself? Or would her battle for justice end before it ever really began? Jenna Daniels had always been a quiet student. She had never asked for attention. She never wanted to stand out. She did her work, kept to herself, and tried to avoid any more scrutiny than necessary. But the moment Mrs. Thompson decided to humiliate her in front of the entire class, it felt like her world collapsed. Her heart pounded as Mrs. Thompson's words rang in her ears, cutting deeper than she had ever imagined. Look at yourself, Jenna. How do you think you'll be successful in life if you can't even take care of the basics? The words felt like daggers, and the shame settled in her stomach like a heavy stone. It wasn't the first time she'd been made to feel like this, out of place, like she didn't belong. But this time, the pain felt different. It felt like the world was finally seeing what she had always known about herself. She was nothing. That night, when she got home, the humiliation followed her. Her mother was at work, again, leaving Jenna to care for her younger brother, Timmy, who had been sick for a week. The room they shared was small, with peeling paint and an uncomfortable mattress that barely fit both of them. She couldn't remember the last time the apartment had felt like a home. It was just a place they survived in one day at a time. Her clothes weren't dirty because she didn't care. They were dirty because she had no other choice. Her mom worked long hours and couldn't afford to buy new clothes. She couldn't afford to keep the heat on all the time. They scraped by, living paycheck to paycheck, and every day was a constant struggle to make it through the next. Jenna lay awake that night, Timmy's labored breathing beside her. She couldn't sleep. The shame from school gnawed at her. She felt worthless. All she had wanted was to fit in, to not be noticed. But now she couldn't escape the feeling that everyone was watching her, judging her. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. She didn't have the strength anymore. The next morning, as she prepared for school, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the clothes she was putting on. The frayed edges of her jeans, the faded t-shirt that was 2 sizes too big. She hated how it felt, but she had no other option. Her mother couldn't afford anything else. Her mom worked 2 jobs just to keep the electricity on, and Jenna was too afraid to ask for more. At school, Jenna walked through the halls like she always did, head down, avoiding eye contact. But today felt different. Today, the whispers seemed louder. The stares were sharper. Every corner she turned, every door she passed, she felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. When Jenna arrived at Mrs. Thompson's class, she felt the familiar knot in her stomach tighten. She wanted to be invisible. She wanted to hide, to blend in with the walls and disappear. But then Mrs. Thompson walked in. Her gaze immediately landed on Jenna, and before the class had even started, Mrs. Thompson's sharp voice filled the room. "Jenna, come to the front of the class. I think it's time everyone had a lesson in personal hygiene." Jenna's face turned crimson as the room fell silent. She could feel the eyes of every student on her, piercing her skin. The whispers started soft at first, but soon they grew louder. "What's wrong with her clothes? She looks like a mess." Jenna didn't move. She couldn't. It was as if her body had frozen in place, as if the weight of the humiliation had anchored her to the spot. Mrs. Thompson's voice broke the silence again. "Come on, Jenna. Don't make me ask twice." Reluctantly, Jenna stood up and walked to the front of the room. Her hands shook as she stood in front of the class, feeling every set of eyes on her. Mrs. Thompson's face was cold, detached, as if this was nothing more than a lesson to her. "Jenna, do you think this is acceptable?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her tone condescending. "You can't just show up looking like this. You need to take responsibility for how you present yourself." Jenna wanted to speak, to tell Mrs. Thompson that she didn't have any other choice, that she couldn't change the circumstances of her life, but the words wouldn't come. She stood there, silently bearing the weight of her teacher's judgment. She didn't have the energy to fight. She was too exhausted. It wasn't until the lunch break that Jenna started to feel something stir inside her. She had been humiliated, yes, but what did it matter anymore? She had spent her whole life trying to stay small, to keep her head down. But today something inside her snapped. As she sat down on the bench outside, tears stung her eyes, but she refused to cry. She couldn't cry in front of them. That was when Casey, a girl she had never spoken to much before, sat down next to her. Casey wasn't popular, but she wasn't an outcast either. She had always been quietly kind, a student who seemed to notice things that others didn't. "Hey," Casey said softly, offering Jenna a granola bar. "I'm sorry about what happened. No one should treat you like that." Jenna shook her head, trying to brush it off, but Casey wouldn't let her. "You know," Casey continued, "I've seen you around. You're not the only one here who has it hard. But what happened today? It wasn't right. You deserve better than that." Jenna was taken aback by Casey's words. For the first time that day, she felt like someone truly saw her. And it was a revelation. "I don't know what to do," Jenna admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It's just, I'm tired, you know? I'm tired of pretending." Casey leaned in closer, her voice steady and strong. "You don't have to pretend anymore. I can help. We can help. But you have to let me." Jenna felt a flicker of hope, a light in the darkness. The days that followed were a blur. Jenna didn't expect things to change overnight, but the support from Casey, and a few other students who quietly rallied behind her, was more than she had ever imagined. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. But as the whispers died down, something darker began to rise. Jenna learned that Mrs. Thompson wasn't just a teacher. She was connected to a network of wealthy donors who controlled the school. The very people who perpetuated the systems of inequality Jenna had fought against her entire life. It wasn't just about her clothes. It was about a system that kept her in her place. And now, with the truth beginning to break through, Jenna realized the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. The fight was just beginning, and the forces she was up against were far more powerful than one teacher's judgment. But who would stand with her, and how far would she have to go to tear down the system that had held her back for so long? Jenna had always been the quiet girl, the one who never asked for attention. She was used to being invisible. That's how she survived. Invisibility had been her armor. If people couldn't see her, they couldn't hurt her. But now, the weight of Mrs. Thompson's words crushed her. The shame, the hurt, the anger. It all swirled inside her, a storm she couldn't ignore. She thought about what Casey had said to her during lunch. "You deserve better than this." For the first time, Jenna let herself believe it. Maybe she did deserve better. Maybe she didn't have to wear her invisibility like a cloak. Maybe it was time to stand tall, even if it meant taking on something bigger than she could handle. But could she? Could someone like her, someone who had spent her life quietly trying to get by, really challenge the system that had always kept her down? The next morning, Jenna made a decision. She wouldn't let Mrs. Thompson's words define her. She wouldn't let the world believe she was less than who she was, less than what she deserved. Jenna wasn't just a girl in dirty clothes. She was someone who mattered. And for the first time, she was going to make sure everyone knew that. Jenna knew she had to tell someone. Someone who could help her get the truth out. She couldn't take on Mrs. Thompson alone. She didn't have the power. But she had something else. She had proof. Jenna had already made a list of the things she had gone through. The late nights with her sick brother, the broken heating system, the food that ran out far too quickly. But more importantly, she had the one thing that Mrs. Thompson couldn't ignore, the truth about her life. Her clothes were dirty because she didn't have the luxury of clean clothes. Her clothes were dirty because her mother couldn't afford new ones, because the bills were always higher than the paycheck. But Jenna wasn't the only one in this situation. She wasn't the only student at Eastside High who came from a home that couldn't offer the basics. She wasn't the only one struggling. She didn't have the resources to fight back. But she had her story. That morning, Jenna decided to go to Principal Harris. He had always been a man who seemed to care about fairness, but would he care enough to challenge a teacher with as much influence as Mrs. Thompson? Jenna wasn't sure, but she was willing to try. When Jenna entered Principal Harris's office, she found him sitting behind his desk, reviewing paperwork. He looked up as she entered and gave a small smile. "Jenna, what can I do for you?" Jenna swallowed. She was nervous, but there was a fire in her now that she couldn't ignore. "I need to talk to you about Mrs. Thompson." Principal Harris raised an eyebrow. He didn't say anything, just gestured for her to sit. "I'm listening," he said quietly. Jenna took a deep breath and began to tell him everything. The public shaming, how Mrs. Thompson had called her out in front of the class, and how she had felt completely humiliated. But she didn't stop there. "And the reason I look the way I do," Jenna continued, her voice trembling but determined, "is because I don't have the luxury of new clothes. I can't change the circumstances I live in, and neither can a lot of other kids here. We live in a world where we're judged based on things we can't control. And it hurts." Principal Harris was quiet for a long moment. Jenna could feel his gaze on her, and for a moment, she feared that he would dismiss her. But then he spoke. "Jenna, I didn't know you were going through this. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up." She blinked, surprised. "But," he continued, his voice becoming more serious, "this is not something we can just ignore. I will have a meeting with Mrs. Thompson. You've been treated unfairly, and I will make sure that's addressed." Jenna felt a small sense of relief. For the first time, it seemed like someone was finally seeing her for who she truly was. Not as the girl in dirty clothes, but as someone who deserved to be treated with dignity. The next few days felt like a blur. Jenna tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the shame still clung to her like a shadow. She had done the right thing, but she didn't know if it would be enough. Would Principal Harris really stand up to Mrs. Thompson? Would he follow through? And then came the shock. During a faculty meeting, it was revealed that the school board had been reviewing teacher conduct in light of recent complaints, specifically about Mrs. Thompson's behavior. Jenna wasn't sure how it had happened, but she knew one thing for sure. Her voice had been heard. But there was one person who wasn't happy with the investigation, and that was Mrs. Thompson. A week later, Jenna received a message that made her stomach drop. "You think you've won? You think you can just tear me down and walk away? You don't know who you're messing with, Jenna. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." It was signed simply with the letter T, a direct threat. Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that this battle wasn't over. No, in fact, it was just beginning. Mrs. Thompson wasn't the kind of person to let things go easily. And now, with the truth out in the open, Jenna had made a powerful enemy. As Jenna stood in front of her mirror that night, staring at the reflection of the girl she had tried so hard to hide, a realization hit her. She hadn't just stood up to Mrs. Thompson. She had opened a door that could never be closed. But would the fight for justice end with her? Or was this just the beginning of something much bigger? Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. When Jenna answered, her breath caught in her throat as a voice on the other end said, "I have some information that could change everything. You need to know what's really going on in this school. But you have to be prepared. If you want to take this fight all the way, there are things you need to understand. Dark things. Dangerous things." Jenna's heart raced. This wasn't just about her anymore. This wasn't just about clothes. This was bigger than anything she could have ever imagined. "Are you ready for the truth, Jenna?" And just like that, she knew the war for justice was far from over. It had been a few days since Jenna had shared her story with Principal Harris. The tension was palpable in the hallways, and Mrs. Thompson had become an increasingly distant figure at the school. It wasn't hard to see the cracks in the facade. Teachers began to speak out, and even some of the students who had once quietly judged Jenna started to rally around her. But the breakthrough came in the form of an unexpected ally. Casey. Casey, who had always kept to herself, approached Jenna with a look of determination in her eyes. "I can't let this go, Jenna. Mrs. Thompson is wrong, and I'll help you take this all the way. You're not alone in this." Jenna was overwhelmed. She had felt so alone for so long, but now, with Casey's support and a growing number of others behind her, she realized the battle wasn't just hers to fight anymore. Then it happened. A meeting was set, and Principal Harris finally called in Mrs. Thompson to confront the issue head-on. As Mrs. Thompson sat across from Principal Harris, Jenna could feel the unease in the air. The silence was thick with anticipation. But it was what Mrs. Thompson didn't say that spoke volumes. "I didn't think I was doing anything wrong," Mrs. Thompson began, her voice defensive. "I was trying to teach Jenna the importance of personal responsibility. If I hadn't said something, she would never have learned." Jenna clenched her fists, the anger bubbling up inside her. How could Mrs. Thompson be so blind? She wasn't teaching Jenna anything. She was hurting her, but Jenna kept quiet. She had learned by now that actions spoke louder than words. The truth finally came out during the meeting, though not in the way anyone expected. As Mrs. Thompson continued to deflect blame, Principal Harris calmly slid a folder across the desk toward her. "Mrs. Thompson, I think you should look at this. It's the report from the school's financial assistance office, outlining the challenges some of our students face, specifically students like Jenna." The room fell into stunned silence as Mrs. Thompson looked down at the folder, her eyes widening as she began to read the documents. Jenna's mother has been working 2 jobs for years, struggling to keep food on the table. Jenna and her younger brother often have to share clothes, and the family is frequently behind on bills, Principal Harris continued. "Jenna is doing her best to make it through each day, with no help from anyone. She doesn't need to be told that she's failing. She needs compassion." Mrs. Thompson's face turned pale. The realization hit her with full force. Her actions had been based on ignorance. Jenna had never wanted to tell anyone about her home life. She had kept it hidden, a source of shame and fear. But the truth was now out in the open. And as Mrs. Thompson processed the information, Jenna could see the guilt start to settle over her. It was the first time Mrs. Thompson had truly understood the weight of what she had done. Mrs. Thompson finally spoke, her voice trembling with something between regret and embarrassment. I didn't know. I had no idea you were going through all that, Jenna. I'm so sorry. I never should have said those things. You didn't deserve that. You shouldn't have been humiliated in front of your classmates." Jenna felt a mix of emotions. She didn't know how to respond. For so long, she had lived in a world where people assumed she didn't care, that she didn't try. But here, in this room, Mrs. Thompson was admitting her mistake. And Jenna realized, for the first time, that the world didn't always have to be as cold and indifferent as she'd believed. "Thank you for telling me the truth," Mrs. Thompson said quietly. "I've learned a lot, and I'll do everything I can to make it right." But the battle wasn't just about Jenna anymore. The entire school system had failed her. It wasn't just one teacher. It was a system of judgment and indifference that had perpetuated the cycle of pain and shame. The next day, Mrs. Thompson issued a formal apology to Jenna in front of the class. There was no more shame in Jenna's heart. It was as if a weight had been lifted. The students, some of whom had whispered cruelly behind her back, now offered looks of quiet support. The school board, after reviewing the matter, decided to take action. Mrs. Thompson was given additional sensitivity training, and the school implemented new policies to support students from low-income families. No longer would shame be a weapon used against those who already struggled. Jenna had become more than a student in dirty clothes. She was now a catalyst for change, and the support she found in the aftermath of her bravery rippled throughout the school. Her classmates began to understand that people aren't always what they seem. No one was just their clothes, just the label that others placed on them. Everyone had a story, one that deserved to be heard. As the days went by, Jenna's life began to change in small but significant ways. The whispers in the hallway died down, replaced by smiles and supportive gestures. But the most significant change was within her. For the first time, Jenna saw herself as more than a girl in worn-out clothes. She was someone who mattered, someone who deserved respect. When Jenna walked into class the next week, she didn't feel the weight of shame following her every step. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had helped others find the courage to do the same. But the story didn't end there. Jenna had exposed the system for what it was. She had stood up and fought, but the fight wasn't over. Her next challenge was bigger than she had ever imagined. Mrs. Thompson's actions were just the tip of the iceberg. There were more students at Eastside High, hidden in the shadows, whose stories had never been told. Jenna had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. The fight for justice wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been overlooked, judged, or silenced. And Jenna wasn't going to stop until the whole world heard their stories.